call the Cuyahoga County Committee of the Whole meeting for January the 15th, 2013. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Calling the roll, Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Schron.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent this evening. Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
Mr. Germana.
Here.
And Ms. Conley.
Here.
Quorum.
I'd like to entertain a motion to mark Ms. Simon's absence as excused.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Nolan, second by Ms. Conwell. We'll note the appearance of Mr. Jones. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Please mark Mrs. Simon as excused. I believe a number of people have signed in for public comment related to the agenda.
Yes, Madam Chair, 4 persons have signed in to speak. The first being Ronald Nicholas.
Mr. Nicholas? Mr. Nicholas, if you would start with your name, and you have 3 minutes. You can raise it up.
Thank you. My name is Ronald Nicholas. I've been active in the Greater Cleveland commercial real estate since 1982. I have submitted several winning proposals to the county in the past, namely the Virgil Brown Building, the Gerald E. First Auto Title Building. I also had procured NOACA for their building. And most recently, I was served as a consultant to the County Board of Health and assisted them in the overall planning, financing, and development of their facility at a cost of less than $120 per square foot, which is significant. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I am talking about a financing proposal that may be significant to the development of not only what's going on now at 9th and Euclid, but possibly other places. The proposal I had in 2 previous proposals to the county, the last one in August of '09. I believe at that time I met with Mr. Schron at his offices and submitted an idea to him, but at that time the county was trying to get together to understand who you were, and I think you're doing an excellent job under good leadership and working together. The rationale for the financing proposal is such. The key to a real estate project is financing, and long-term financing should be used for long-term uses to reduce annual costs. The county and the Port Authority may be limited to 25-year bond financing term. Section 307.02 of the Ohio Revised Code would allow you to do 40 years.
We have a court reporter, and I don't want her to wear her fingers out, so if you could just slow down so that she can take it down, we can all understand you.
You probably underestimate her ability.
Okay.
The proposed financing would allow for a 40-year term as under Ohio law. The sale of tax-exempt bonds would allow for the lowest possible financing lease cost. The proposed financing would allow for 5% of the project to have a retail component, which would allow for certain amenities and also add for lease income to the county to reduce the overall cost. The county can also work the project backwards, understanding the financing first. They can make better choices in the overall sale, reuse, partial leaseback, and development of a property that you're involved in. The county can also have a selling price of the property. Components can be adjusted to fit a long range of objectives, such as by looking at a lease cost, you can adjust the price you get up front, up or down, to fit what your long range lease costs would be. I've included in the packages that I've passed out, a dozen packages, which I gave to the clerk and she kindly passed out. Current emails I received from Jessica Donnelly, Director of Municipal Securities Division, City Group Global Markets, to myself, an updated letter of interest, a 1-page structure discussion which outlines how a deal is put together, and 2 funding examples as an arbitrary number of $175 million. I've also added a copy of the last proposal, which I gave to the county, which showed how this financing intermixed with that proposal for your review. I thank you very much for this opportunity, and I certainly wish you luck in the future with this. If I could ever be of service, please contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols.
And thank the court reporter.
The next speaker is Homer Taft.
Good afternoon, President Connolly, members of council. I'm Homer Taft of Bay Village, an attorney for the past 40-some years, a manufacturing manager until very recently when we sold the company, and in real estate literally for all 67 years and some of my life. I'm here to address both your county headquarters and the Ameritrust proposal and facilities in general. If I talk too fast with the court reporter, I hope she'll throw a shoe or something, but with 3 minutes, I'll try and present a few things and I'll cut a few things out. I have a lot of ideas that I'd like to share on facilities. It'll probably have to wait to another time. As to the Ameritrust proposal, I'm probably one of the few people who thought it was a good idea from the first place for the county to buy it. I also always was one who rooted for completing the Brewer design, which was to put a second tower up in 1971. Realized probably neither of those things is going to happen, but I do think it's sad if we can't use the rotunda for county business in a public face for the county. Perhaps that's not possible with the proposals that are before you. The biggest rule is do no harm, and I hope that the executive and the council will focus like a laser light, not just on what's a good headquarters, not just on how to get rid of the most county property or at the best price, but how can you make the economy of this city and of this county the best you can possibly make it. And I hope that you'll evaluate all the proposals in that vein. The Euclid 9th Financial District, if it's not dead, has a very faint heartbeat. And that's certainly one place that you should look at, and the proposals that are before you certainly speak to that. I would hope that in anything you do, you look at creating the most livability and the most economic development in everything you do in facilities, and there's some things I would talk about in another time. But we need to develop a whole new vision for our city. With respect to the specific issues of the Ameritrust and the Euclid 9th corridor, I tend to favor the Geist proposal from what I've read, and unfortunately I've not had an opportunity to see the whole thing. I do have some substantial concerns that too much of this process has been hidden from the public, hidden from all real estate professionals and others who might know something about it till the very last minute, and now that there's a rush to judgment. So I hope you take a very, very careful look. One of the things that I think is important is, and I understand the Geist proposal is supposed to do it, is you need to assure the Ottman garage comes down, that there's a full large garage there that's expanded if you're going to put your county headquarters over there. Whether you restore the P&H buildings or whether you build a new building there, they're both acceptable ideas. Again, I say, you know, the Geist, from what I can see, may be the best. If you're going to have a lease with the option to purchase it at the end, I think you need to have absolute assurances in whatever your agreements are, whatever your arrangements are, that you get an absolutely first-class, sustainable facility that if you get it back in 25 or 40 or whatever years, is going to be an excellent facility, not just now, but then, and easy to maintain and reduce costs to this county. I wish there was more time, but I thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Taft.
The next speaker is Arnie Goldman.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, County Council members. My name is Arne Goldman. I'm an architect and the Director of Business Development for Marus Brothers Construction. We are the construction entity for the Optima team. I'm here today to urge County Council to engage a third-party, objective, independent peer review consultant to evaluate the proposal submitted for the Initiative 1 County Headquarters project, as well as the Initiative 3 Ameritrust Complex. Given the substantial discrepancies between the CBRE and Optima analyses regarding the Geist and Optima proposals, and considering the questions and issues raised regarding compliance with the proposal process itself, it seems that only good outcomes could result from such a peer review process. Here are several issues at the core of our concerns. Under the Geist proposal, which by the way combines initiatives 1 and 3, the county will be making lease payments that total about $200 million at the end of the 26-year lease term. However, the county could actually end up with exactly the same outcome if it just retained the P&H part of the property that you already own, tore the building down, sold the rest of the Ameritrust complex to Geist or whomever, and then hired your own architect, your own construction manager, and built the same 225,000 square foot building at a cost of $300 a square foot, which is $70 million, thereby saving the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County $130 million plus or minus. In either scenario, at the end of the 26-year period, the county's still going to own an asset worth about $40 million. So why spend $130 million more of taxpayer money to get to the same outcome? Our second group of concerns pertains to inconsistencies around the proposal process. The RFP required that proposals be standalone for each individual initiative. However, the Geist proposal necessarily and clearly combines initiatives 1 and 3. It is noteworthy that during the negotiation process, Optima asked if it would be okay to combine the economics of initiatives 1 and 3, and was told in writing by CBRE that such efforts would be viewed by the county, quote unquote, unfavorably. And finally, the RFP clearly required a lease term of 20 years, not 26 years, as contained in the Geist proposal. In closing, hiring a peer review will only yield a win-win outcome for the county. If the review supports the current decision, so be it. Then the county executive and county council can say to the residents of Cuyahoga County that extra due diligence was used in reaching the decision. And if the review takes exception with the current decision, then the county executive and county council can say to the residents of Cuyahoga County that the extra due diligence has raised some concerns which we need to further evaluate. Look, nobody is in a hurry for the wrong answer. This process of peer review could take but a month. The Plain Dealer actually got it right in the editorial from last Sunday. Because of the importance of this decision, hiring a third-party peer reviewer is essential. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else signed in?
Yes, Madam Chair. Kaim Shoshay.
This time.
Yeah. You remember.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Chaim Shochet of Optima Ventures. Last week, you saw our presentation, which stated that there were $41 million in errors in the Optima presentation. I'm here tonight to tell you that that statement is inaccurate. And even if it were 100% accurate, the majority of the $41 million in errors are from a model which show a $70 million difference. So if you want to look for errors in a $34 million model, you have to look in that model. Don't look for errors in a $70+ million model and apply it to a more conservative model. And it should be noted that CBRE, as the county's consultant, should consider new information and determine how to best benefit the county, even if that means admitting they missed something. CBRE seems more dedicated to merely defending its earlier recommendation amid a rising tide of conflicting information. But it's not about CBRE, it's about the county. I've asked many questions about the process and the data the county used for their recommendation. Many of my questions have either been ignored, have been responded to with incorrect information, or have been elicited replies that raise even more questions. I have prepared for you in simple format a sheet showing the year-over-year cost by going with the current recommendation over Optima. Please also keep in mind that this model is the largest possible footprint for the 925 building, and we feel we can value engineer the plans and reduce the footprint of the 925 building. Keeping in mind that even if you were required the added 20% space, we are still a more viable option for the county and its taxpayers. There's also talk of this transaction not being exclusively about economics. While costs may not be that important to some people when they're spending somebody else's money, in this instant we are talking about the money of the taxpayers. But putting economics aside, I find this even more disturbing. The Optima proposal addressed both sides of Euclid Avenue. It brings life back to one building while repurposing and bringing back to life an entire complex across the street, all of which will be done in a sustainable manner. The investment being made is significantly higher than the current recommendation, which means that there are more jobs, less vacancy, and more economic growth, and all while filling the gap between Playhouse Square and Public Square. The presentation also pointed out an $8.5 million premium on the Ameritrust site. I want to point out that nowhere in any modeling that I have seen was there an added cost of $686,000 a month for the county to stay in place for an extended period of time been a factor. And even after this extended period of time, for which the county will exclusively bear the costs for, Geist will start providing a per diem penalty to the county. This does not cover the county's per diem cost of operating their facilities per the January 2nd presentation made by CBRE. Commercial real estate is complex. At the very least, the County Council should conduct or authorize an impartial review of the entire process. I respectfully suggest that you not rush into making a decision about such an important issue that could potentially cost taxpayers over $200 million. I urge you to take this opportunity to provide the biggest economic boost that you can for downtown Cleveland, while at the same time saving taxpayers more than $30 million. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Madam Chair, no one else has signed in to speak.
All right, item 14 is the item referred to the committee. And before we read the item, I'd like to make a statement. The project we discussed today marks the culmination of a 2-year process in which the County Council and the administration worked tirelessly to reform the county's contracting procedures. It began with the adoption of the county's Contracting and Purchasing Procedures Ordinance and was strengthened with the adoption of the Ethics Code and most recently the Debarment Ordinance, resulting in a contracting approval process of which all citizens of Cuyahoga County can be proud. By ordinance, Council established the Contract and Purchasing Board, which reviews and approves all contracts between $500 and $100,000. We established the Board of Control to review and approve all contracts between $100,000 and $500,000. Both boards, which meet in public, have council representation. We have also given County Council the power to take any matter before either of these boards and send it directly for full council review and approval. And currently, County Council is the approval authority for all contracts over $500,000. In other words, every single Cuyahoga County contract of $500 or above is discussed and approved in public and with oversight from the County Council, either acting directly or through the Board of Control or the Contracts and Purchasing Board. Under the county's elaborate contracting procedure, neither the county executive nor the county council are contracting entities. The contracting entity is the county of Cuyahoga itself, and the approval of any contract must take place in accordance with established procedures. For example, in this project, CBRE and URS are not the county executive consultant, nor are they the county council's consultants. They are the county of Cuyahoga's consultants. Their contracts were approved under the county's contracting procedures with involvement from both the executive and the legislative branch. They do their work for the benefit of the county itself and not for the benefit of any individual branch of the county government. Realizing the complexity of this real property consolidation project, the County Council established measures above and beyond the county's established contracting procedures, and Council has had substantial involvement in this project from its inception. As you know, in the early part of 2011, the county retained Allegro Realty to conduct a space study to determine the county's real estate needs. When that work was completed, Allegro presented its finding to the County Council on January 20th, 2012, almost a full year ago from today. Shortly thereafter, the County Council established an ad hoc real property committee to specifically oversee the entirety of the property consolidation project. Before the county issued the RFP for the property proposals, Council's Real Property Committee held 7 meetings on this project. The committee also conducted tours of county properties that were being offered for sale so as to fully understand the scope of the project. Working through staff, Council submitted multiple pages of questions to the administration and the consultant team regarding the project and the RFP. The administration and the consultants answered those questions in meetings before the committee. The committee also reviewed the early drafts of the RFP and made several revisions to the RFP before it was released. Once the county established the procedures, the County Council received extensive updates and asked questions in 6 executive sessions, all sessions permitted by law because of the nature of discussions. The council also toured the 4 shortlisted properties and heard from the 4 proposers. Once the county's team was ready to make a recommendation, we worked with the law department and the administration to set a schedule under which the recommendation could be evaluated and a decision made by the county council. You may be aware that the historic tax credit available to the Ameritrust complex were scheduled to expire on December 31st, 2012, which would have necessitated a quick decision by the county council. The county therefore sought and received an extension of the tax credits until the end of February to enable council to enter into an even more thorough review and evaluation process. While the county council usually votes on contractual matters within 2 weeks, we determined that this contract should go through at least 3 readings before any vote could be taken on this project. We also made sure that the project was announced at the December 11, 2012 meeting so that it could get the benefit of an extra 2 weeks of public input, as council did not have a meeting scheduled for the late part of December. Instead, council held a special committee of the whole meeting on January 2nd, during which it considered the project. The resolution did not receive its second reading until January 8th, virtually a month from when it was first announced. Council also scheduled a second meeting of the Committee of the Whole for today to ask further questions and more fully and publicly consider the project. Furthermore, while council traditionally handles most matters in committee, in this case, council made sure that presentations about this project were heard at a regular council meeting in addition to the committee and special meetings. In other words, by the time this project is approved, County Council would have had the benefit of at least 20 meetings, including 7 ad hoc committee meetings, 4 committees of the whole, 6 executive sessions, and 3 full council meetings. This does not include all the oversight provided by council staff for the past year. Joe Nani, Khalil Saran, and Trevor McAleer, whom we trust to comb through the $1.3 billion project, have reviewed all of the financial information, including all the information submitted by other proposers on this project. As I noted in my statement on January the 8th, 2012, Council will consider all evidence in voting for the resolution before it, including all materials and presentations made for or against the resolution. But as we near a vote on this project, it is worth taking a second to recognize the volume of work that has brought us this far and to take pride in the professional manner in which the county's team has handled this project. This truly is the byproduct of 2 years of very hard work, and I want to thank everyone that's involved. Would you like to read the resolution?
Resolution number 2012-0264, a resolution making awards on requisition number 24534 to Geis Property Management for sale of the Ameritrust Complex and entry of a lease for consolidated county headquarters at the site of the P&H buildings, authorizing the county executive to execute all documents in connection with said awards and consistent with this resolution, authorizing the Director of Public Works to administer said project, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Pardon me while we get set up a little bit. Thank you very much, members of council. And Councilwoman Connolly, I just want to acknowledge your statement. Thank you very much for making it. Certainly, and I think we've said this a couple of times, your group has done the yeoman's work of really making sure that you fully understood the process and the opportunities in front of you over the last 7 months since we've been involved and for the year prior to that. So thank you for that, and thank you for meeting with us again tonight. Pardon me 1 second. So tonight we are here to again discuss the recommendation of the executive and the Public Works Department and the consultants that they have engaged for your consolidated headquarters project and the potential sale of the Ameritrust complex. So the couple of slides that we'll show you, you have seen some of these before. These are, again, some preliminary renderings of the proposed site. Again, I want to stress that word preliminary. While these are pretty good renderings of what could be on the site, certainly we're in the early stages of the design review phase, and the county, Public Works, Executive Council would all have the opportunity to have input into the design of the facility and the interiors. This is a look at a really nice rendering of the rooftop, the green rooftop that would be on the southwest corner of the facility, overlooking one of my favorite places in town, which is the ball field, Progressive Field. This is a rendering of the ground floor. Mary Ann Lash with URS. I don't know if you'd like to
Sure.
make any.
The proposal is for a two-story lobby that's facing the corner of 9th and Prospect. You can begin to see that in the background of the space. It would create a very light and bright ground floor. As you come through security, it would be directly visible, the transaction counters where citizens come in to pay taxes and to get specific services from the county. And then this leads into the main core of the building. This building is unique in that it also has a fourth floor lobby that's directly attached to the parking garage by a bridge that crosses over Prospect. There would be another security station here, and citizens could come directly into the fourth floor as well as the first floor.
To give you a quick review of the some of the basic deal points, the proposed property would be an 8-story building at the corner of Prospect and East 9th Street. Right there, it's the northeast corner of where those streets intersect. The average annual rent is just over $30 per square foot over the term. There's a concession on the front end where the first 12 months of the term are actually discounted by about 75%. The allowance that's being offered by the landlord after they build the base building condition of the property is about $50 per square foot. And there is a garage that would go straight from the building into the Ameritrust garage over Prospect. It's a 1,050 car facility between the Ameritrust and the Ottman garages as they sit today. A couple of significant points which we've discussed about this. Number one, there is a premium that is being paid for the Ameritrust property through this proposal. It's just about $8.5 million above the next highest offer. It is a 26-year term. At the end of this lease, of this 26-year lease, the county would have the option to purchase the building for $1. There's a little bit of excess space in the building, and there are options for growth in the balance of the complex, upwards of 75,000 square feet in the event the county needed it. A couple of the points on which we like this offer and the reasons why it is being recommended to you today again. Number one, a good partner in Geist Companies. They've got a great, rich development history in Northeast Ohio, and we appreciate that. They've got a very good background, and just to watch them through the process, you could really see how hard they work, how ingenuitive they are, and how well they will serve you in the future. It's a good mixed-use concept. We really believe, and this speaks a bit to Mr. Taft's comments earlier, we really believe that having the county tenancy there provides a catalyst for the redevelopment of that site at a critical intersection. And there's a great commitment by the developer to make it an environmentally friendly and sustainable project. Won't hit on every single one of these. One item that we thought was important for this particular site was that it had great access to public transit, inexpensive parking options, and the access to the highway. Certainly it does. The parking around this complex within walking distance is very affordable and very plentiful. You have the benefit of both new construction and absorbing vacancy. This isn't just putting a new building on an empty site. This is taking out 200,000 square feet roughly of space that would otherwise be going on the market and replacing it with a good functional government site. Certainly the county has the option to acquire the property at the end for $1, that's of interest. And when we compared all the costs and we built our models, which were comprehensive, to show all of the costs of these shortlisted properties, really the costs for this are comparable to existing construction, and that really helped to drive the point home for the county that this would be the option to recommend to you. Last item, because I did promise that I would be brief to a number of people this evening, the last item to remind you of has to do with the facility budgets. I just think it's good to put all of this in perspective as we look at this in comparison with where you're at today, because really this is a process about improving your current situation. That's what the county embarked on doing in the beginning of 2011. You embarked on a process to evaluate the real estate, to figure out the best strategy, to execute that strategy, and to come up with a solution that would accomplish the economic savings, but also put you into the right facility. Based upon the report and the studies done by Allegro, and you've seen the binders, which are immense, if you were to keep the facilities, the subject facilities for this particular decision going over the next 20 years, you'd be looking at an average annual cost over that time period of just under $12.5 million a year. The proposed project, even looking at the 26-year average, puts you at $8.16 million a year average annual cost over that 26-year period, before you have an option to potentially acquire the building for $1. And I want to note that that $8.16 million number, that nearly $4.5 million in savings that you get by getting into a new, very functional, very appropriate facility for yourselves, doesn't include the value of the building that you might get for $1 at the end. For the purposes of tonight, we've taken that out of this number. Just, we thought it would put in perspective for you. This is a huge savings that you could be looking at, and I'm not even at this point taking into account that facility that you would have the option to acquire for $1. Quickly before we move on, because I know that there might be some questions that you're interested in asking. There were a couple of statements made during public comment I'd just like to address very, very quickly. First, presentation made by Mr. Arn Goldman of Marus Brothers, and the basic statement, one of the basic statements was that the lease payments with the Geist property would cost you $200 million, and the county could accomplish the same thing by spending $70 million to build the property. First, that's a very liberal rounding from the mid $180 million range, which is the total of all payments under Geist, up to 200. And secondly, that $70 million number doesn't take into account the fact that even if you build the facility for that cost, you have to operate it for 26 years. The simple cost of operating a facility for 26 years cannot be ignored. And I know that you've learned that in recent weeks, but you cannot ignore the cost to actually operate these facilities. And I think that's a mistake that some people have been making in their presentations to you. It simply costs money to operate a building every year. Second, a couple of comments about the RFP itself and the requirements within it. The RFP did not, in fact, require initiatives to stand alone. In fact, the RFP was specifically tailored with the opportunity for somebody to propose contingent and interrelated deals. That was something that we discussed with council in open meetings prior to the release of that RFP. And it was certainly something that we did with the intention of saying that we want to see what's creative. We know that the real estate world is becoming one in which interrelated transactions are maybe not the norm, but they're becoming more prevalent. And if one of those can present itself, we'd like to evaluate it. Also, too, the requirement for a 20-year lease was not a pure requirement of the RFP. We were very specific at your direction and at the executive and public works direction to make certain requirements in the RFP, things that would disqualify proposals. A great example would be that the building had to be located in the central business district of Cleveland. And if it wasn't, it wouldn't be considered. There were certain requirements outlined in the RFP, and then everything else was a strong preference. So certainly, this was not a requirement. It was never outlined as such in the RFP. There was no justification for disqualifying it once we started to evaluate it. The second presentation by the representative from Optima, Chaim Shuckett. The first thing that I think is very telling, just to point out, is that Optima, in fact, after making their presentation on the second, did meet with us. They have met with county representatives. We have reviewed the analysis that we've done and the analysis that they presented to talk about where we differed in both opinion and assumptions and simple arithmetic math. It was after those meetings, and I assume the result of those meetings, that caused Optima to acknowledge that the numbers in their initial analysis presented to you on the second weren't accurate, and resulted in their revised analysis, which has recently been forwarded again to council. So we have met with them in person. The most recent analysis that they've done certainly shows a much, much smaller gap, and still unfortunately reflects some inconsistencies in the assumptions, notably the absolute ignoring of certain operating expenses, which, as I said before, you can't ignore. They exist in any facility you would occupy, leased or otherwise. So with that, I thank you so much for your time and would welcome any feedback or questions that you might have.
Is there a format you want to use as far as how many questions and then break, or
Yeah, why don't,
my present?
we can invoke the Greenspan rule. If you,
That's one question that goes, one question that goes over 8 different.
we'll be limited to 3 questions, and we'll go back around if you have additional questions.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, one of the questions that I have in regards to the monthly rent, and what it will be the impact, or what would be the impact in your calculation if we did not have that dollar option at the end of this transaction, but rather had fair market value in this particular transaction. And again, I'll preface this with, these are going to be pretty big, some of these are pretty big questions, so I would not necessarily anticipate that you might be able to answer that one off the cuff. So if it means going back and doing some research to be able to crunch that number, because I can only assume that what you have done is you've given a calculation, and as the old phrase is, that nothing is for nothing, so therefore there has to be some differential between those two. And granted, there's a risk component then if the building doesn't come over to us at $1, but comes over as fair market value, then the holder of that probably picks up a greater degree of risk. So is the question clear as far as what the difference would be?
The question is clear.
Okay.
I appreciate that you acknowledge that it's not the easiest question to answer, and certainly one that we can look into a little bit more. I'd like to say a couple of things in response. Number one, that the offer from the Geist Group was never contemplated to be built as a lease and then worked into that option to purchase. And as you know, from day one, their concept was we will fully amortize our debt over the term of the lease, and at the end, not having a balance remaining, we would offer you the option to acquire it for $1. It becomes difficult to quantify options like that and to say, what would the rent be? You could even go to something as simple as, if I had a lease with an expansion option, what does that expansion option cost me in order to have that right and that flexibility? But it would be difficult to value that, at least right now. I'd like to dig into it a little bit for you without really probably talking a bit to the Geist Group as well and really understanding how they valued the property. I think it's very telling that if you looked at comparisons in our market of a new construction and you compared it to the Geist offer, we've got 2 really good examples in the Central Business District right now of new construction. The first one is the Flats East Bank project, which is going up right now. And the second one is actually the proposal that was tendered to the county by Weston for the build-to-suit in the warehouse district. The Flats East Bank is a proposal where tenants there pay in the mid-30s per square foot for rent. They pay increases in operating expenses over time, and they do not have options to purchase the building fair market value or otherwise. The Weston offer was closer to $40 a foot, increases in operating expenses over time as well, and no option to purchase, built into that. So, part of the challenge is that what you're looking at is an option where for new construction, you're getting a average rental rate at 30, which is lower than both those numbers, and that option to buy. And with new construction, as you know, certainly you're a 10 to 20% reduction on square footage over existing buildings. So my short answer should be, I'd like to look into this a little bit for you. Certainly see if we can identify some response that's a little bit more specific to your question But I think there's some good examples that kind of show how competitive this offer is for new construction in general.
And the mere question being asked, don't assume that I have a bias one way or the other. It's just that if at the last meeting you indicated that the building probably will have a fair market value of $40 million, therefore, if you back out that $40 million, what is the net effect of the current rent payments? If you can give us a better handle on that. And we moved, there was a question coming up that came up from Optima on 26-year schedule. Also then the logical follow-on question is what would it look like at a 20-year schedule? So, because that's what, there was a request to give us some apples to apples comparison. So that's just a bifurcated question on the same thing. Fair market value at the end of 20 years, fair market value at the end of the 26 is where we are right now, and what effect, if any. And I also realized that if the Geist company is holding it, they now have picked up a risk that they didn't anticipate in the way they financed and put this package together. So that's only seems to me to be a fair way to look at how does that shake out.
Absolutely, and
I'm sure there was one question or two, by the way. I tried to package that together rather than.
there might be a couple in there, but that's all right. Certainly, we would want to talk to Geis a bit about your first question. Your second question, we'd want to talk to them as well. Might be a little bit easier to answer. It's simply, it could simply be a matter of amortization over a shorter period of time, but we'd like to look into it.
Following the Greenspan rule, I try to prefer that as question one with an A and B to it, but that's okay. We'll see if we can if I can convince my colleagues in that regard. Mr. Taft raised the question about the rotunda and its public use and his desire. I know that he's very active, involved with the longest-standing Civic League free speech component, I think, next door, and so he's got a real bias towards that whole side of the next door. But the rotunda itself is a question that right now, I think in some of the conversations we had, that there was what happens if we were to retain the ownership of the rotunda as a county government. I know we just had this discussion as a statewide with public ownership of the turnpike. What would public ownership of the rotunda, what cost effect, if any, would that have? And again, if these are not questions that are capable of being answered, do you have an idea of what it is? Because I'm sure that that's built into the debt service payments that are built into the Geis project.
No, that's a fair, little bit of a easier question, because we do have some information on that. Geis did actually provide that as an option in their proposals, that the rotunda could be leased by the county. The lease rate was a triple net lease rate of $14.91 per square foot for the entire facility. Just about, I think that might be a 38,000 square foot facility. And that was what they offered with 2% bumps over the course of the lease. This is if you took it, by the way, on day one. And then you would have the operating expenses of the facility in addition to that as well. So if you took it on day one, those would be the expenses. The ongoing right that the county has to take that facility is a right of offer, where if the facility is not being used, if Geis is not using it as amenity to their project or doesn't have a tenant who is using it, then the county has the right to quite literally pick up the phone, call the Geis companies and say, we'd like to have that facility at fair market value, and you can enter into a lease to take it on at that point, or you could also do so right now at the beginning.
Well, because the way you answer that opens up the questions that I wanted to ask about the rotunda. Then we can exercise that option to take the rotunda at what point? Anytime is the way I understood?
Yes, what we might call an evergreen right. So anytime, so long as it is not being used. If it's vacant, if Geis does not have a lease on it or a user occupying it, the county has the right. You know, if Geis puts somebody in there today and 5 years down the road, they exit the building and there's no user, and the county looks at it and says, we'd really like to do something special there, the county can exercise that option and do so.
Could we also exercise it subject to the tenants being in there and take it with the tenant?
Sorry, help me understand.
If you indicated that if there's a tenant in there, they would still be there. Can we take it with whatever the lease program is that they have with the tenant?
You know, that's not currently a part of the contract. I assume you mean basically take it on and do a sublease.
Yeah, whatever tenant they have, whether it's a year, 3 years, 5 years, and we take it subject to that.
That's not currently a part of the transaction. It could be, although I don't think that the Geist Companies has settled on a final user. It could be that that becomes an important amenity to whatever else they're doing in the project. And so I think from their perspective, at least to this point, they've always suggested that they want to make sure that they want to make that an important corner too. They want to make it beautiful and available to the public and lit up. And I don't think that they would, at this point, I know that they haven't offered that. It hasn't been something they've been willing to do at this point.
Okay, and would the dollar option be the right to also pick up the rotunda at the end of the 26 years?
The offer from Geist was that that would be an opportunity if you committed to the rotunda on day one and effectively paid for it through the 26-year term. Then you would have that option at the end.
Okay, I'll stop, and I think that's 3+.
Madam President, if I may just clarify, exactly, the just to make sure that there's no confusion, is the dollar amount that Mr. Jeffers clarified, and that was if we took it on day one as part of this transaction. If we do not take it as part of this transaction, what is in the lease is the right of first offer on that property, basically, that they would give us. If they were about to sell do something with the property, we would have the right of first offer on it. But we can have further discussions on that.
Then I assume it would require some kind of a calculation as far as the cost benefit as to where that all shakes out, if we take it year 10 or year 5 or something of that nature.
Basically fair market value.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is no dollar amount in the.
Yes, Madam Chair. I still have parking concerns for the residents and the employees, and I just need to ask, how did we get to 1,025 parking spaces? I believe it was 650 at one time.
That's the total size of the garage. Certainly, the Geist Companies want to make sure that they can utilize that garage for the balance of the project as well. So the county will have spaces that are dedicated to them in the garage, and there will be a discount that Geist offers to the employees for a certain period of time. And then after that, the parking is open to the public. If the county fills that garage with their maximum allotment and additional employees choose to park there, they can go and approach the parking lot attendant and do so.
And how many spaces was that? Was that 650?
It's not that much. I believe the number is 400.
And so my additional, the neighboring parking will cost the residents what? Has there been a study on that? The parking facilities that are around there?
There has, in fact. It's part of our due diligence in looking into the various options. We did a really thorough review, everything from contacting those individual parking lots to literally walking and driving the neighborhoods around the buildings to fully understand the quantities and the costs of the parking around there. What we found, to our pleasant surprise, was that in that area there was actually more parking than we had anticipated. We knew that it was pretty good, but there's more than we had anticipated. There's a lot of surface lots, especially to the south of the current P&H site of that intersection of Prospect and 9th. There's a lot of surface lots, and those lots are closer in terms of walking distance than the surface lots that many of the employees of the county use today. So there's a number of employees of the county who elect not to, for example, if they're in the administration building, there's a number of employees who elect not to park in the Huntington garage because surface parking is less expensive. And they will walk down to the lots that the city of Cleveland runs, what we commonly refer to as the Muni lots, or the pit, so to speak, outside of Brown Stadium. And they will go down there to pay those daily rates for parking, which are much less expensive. That walk is 2 to 3 times the distance, and I would note up a hill, as compared to the walk that from this site, those same folks would have the opportunity to walk south on 9th Street. There's lots that extend east and west of 9th that are surface lots. There are garages all along Bolivar and Huron and Prospect going both directions.
Will the price range still be the same? Because that was one of my main concerns. Down in the pit, you're paying $2 versus if you're going to Bolivar or whatever, are they still going to match that $2? Not just for the parking aspect, but some employees actually make less than others, and that's what fits in their budget. So it's not so much that they don't choose to park in the Huntington, they can't afford to park in the Huntington. So it's
Understood.
just wondering if that's one of the concerns, because it's one of my concerns, as well as, even though out of all the projects, you know, parking really wasn't great on none of them, was also the residents of the county. We're moving out of the service area of the government area, so we're asking our residents to have to come down to the county building to now pay probably double parking if they have to handle something at City Hall or Justice Center or wherever, and also with us, because I'm sure we're not going to get free parking. Or are we? Has that been some discussion? Are we going to set some free parking aside for constituents that might have to do some day-to-day in and out business?
So, first part of your question having to do with the costs in that area. Costs in that area are quite competitive, not quite down to a $2 per day rate, but you do have $3 a day parking in that area, which is very low for the central business district. And additionally, there's a trolley line that runs, that will be running up and down 9th Street. You're all familiar with the free trolleys that are run by the RTA, and they circulate downtown in 3 different loops. There will be a trolley that runs from the municipal lots at the north end of East 9th Street, where you do have that $2 a day parking, and brings people at rush hours for free to this location. And people will have access to that as well. Your question about constituents, certainly having the lower cost, more abundant parking in this neighborhood, we viewed it as a positive, especially in light of just what you've had to deal with over the last couple of years with construction and projects in this area. Progress is wonderful, but it does cause some pain in the parking area. And what you've experienced here would not necessarily be the same. There's suddenly going to be closer, less expensive, and more abundant parking. If the county wants to provide free parking to constituents and visitors, it would do so. It would have to do so through an arrangement with the parking lot operator, and set up a system where they would reimburse the operator, they would tally, and they would provide that expense.
I heard a 5-year deal that we have with the parking garages. Is that true?
I believe it's a 2-year deal for a discount in the adjacent garage, and then thereafter it goes to fair market value.
To the county? To the county.
Parking in that area is currently in the range of, for garages, if service lots are $3 to $5 a day in that area, parking in that area for garages is really anywhere from $90 a month to $130 a month.
I'm just wondering, realistically, was it really thought out? So we have 400 parking spaces. We're going to have 750 employees move to that building. That's 350 that will have to park outside in the neighboring parking spaces. There's other buildings down there. So I know you went and you did a study on where the spaces were available, but are they really available? Are they empty? Are those parking lots filled with current people from other businesses?
It's a really good question. The quick answer, number one, is that you probably won't be likely to have 750 people driving every day. A fair amount of your employees do take public transit, and they would have great access to that at this location. And so that would dramatically decrease the numbers. I know that Public Works has done a study on the number of people who they would anticipate would be parking at the facility as employees on a day-to-day basis. And certainly there's a quantity of available parking in the area. One of the largest garages in our downtown area is 1 block away. That's the Gateway Complex. And within a 1-block walk, you can be in the Gateway Complex in covered parking, for very inexpensive rates if people elected to park there.
Do you know what that rate is?
I can get it for you. I don't know it offhand, but we do have that as part of our survey.
And as far as the Muni lot as well, and I know I don't want to belabor it on parking issues, but, this affects all of us down here, because my other concern is the trolley. Right now, that's just a 2-year contract with RTA, and in the past, I've worked down here where the trolley, due to funding or whatever, has went away. So that's always a possibility. Just the Muni lot, have we thought of anything as far as the county getting some kind of parking with there? Because that's a big parking space too. But of course, you'd use the trolley back and forth to get, or the RTA to get to your car.
Right. The anticipation that we would have would be that any parking contracts that the county would enter into that did not involve the Geist companies and this landlord, they would do so on their own. They could always go to the city to make those arrangements with the municipal lot or the Gateway Complex and make those arrangements as well. Certainly, there's relationships with both those locations and groups.
Thank you.
I'd just like to point out, Ms. Conwell, we've had some very, very preliminary discussions with RTA to see if the possibility is if we could subsidize public transportation passes for employees. I know in the federal building, I think the people over there get a free bus pass, but we actually subsidize the parking for our employees. So if we could give some subsidy to the RTA to get passes to encourage people, because it would certainly be a healthier lifestyle to do a little bit of walking and cut down the pollution, have less cars in the central city. So that's also another option that we're investigating. Mr. Miller and then Mr. Greenspan.
Madam President, Mr. Jeffers, under the proposal that we have on the table, could you kind of outline the current thinking both on the Ameritrust sale and on the headquarters as to what the timeline for the various events would be going forward?
I'm going to ask Mary Ann Lash to address a great deal of this because she's been so involved with the construction schedule. On the front end, the goal would be to close both transactions as soon as we could after a council approval, and to move forward and jump immediately into the design phase of the headquarters and transfer that property to the Geist companies just as soon as they were ready to close. They would obviously have to get all that final paperwork in order, but that would happen as soon as possible after a council vote. And for the construction process, I'll have Mary Ann address that.
Sure. The idea on the construction process, it's two tracks. One track is the design of your tenant spaces within the building, and of course the other track is the design of the building itself. And both those activities would begin as soon as possible after the approval from the council. The Geist schedule suggests that they would receive a building permit in mid-May. Before that, they would like to begin abatement and demolition of the existing P&H building so that the site is ready for construction as soon as the building permit is issued. And they would do, I think that kind of fast-track work that's pretty typical with issuing a separate package for foundations and steel to get that going right away. The interior work would begin at the end of the year. It's showing a very, very late December, but at that point, the building would be completed and closed in, so the interior work could be done. Their goal is to have the building ready for occupancy with the final occupancy permit by mid-July of 2014. And so you could begin moving in at that time. That's the rough outline of the schedule.
And Madam President, what is the expected closing date on the Ameritrust sale, and when would we receive the proceeds?
Potentially at the end of this month, and the proceeds would be in escrow and inure directly to the county at that moment. Whatever the timing it would be for a wire transfer, but we'd be looking at the end of this month. Now, there are other issues with how those proceeds get applied, and those are certainly questions for, I think, maybe the fiscal office, but that would generally be the timing.
And Madam President, to Mr. Jeffers, in reviewing the latest financial transfer resolution for the county, we learned that the space cost for the new Juvenile Justice Center exceeded expectations for 2012 by $1.4 million. And my question is how can we have confidence that we would not have similar variances in the operating costs for the new facility?
Well, I'd actually like to say, number one, my understanding is that, and not having been a part of that project personally, But my understanding is that those construction overages were due to some upfront estimates and assumptions that were not quite as accurate as what we believe is on the table today. I don't know if you'd like to speak to it, but the work that PCS and URS has done in conjunction with the Public Works Group and the executive and the various departments of the county really demonstrates a scope of work, has resulted in a scope of work that everybody has great confidence in. And our understanding of that juvenile justice project is that there was no integrated process at the beginning, and the estimates that were initially released really did not reflect a collaborative effort by the county and their consultants and hires at the time to agree on a number. That's our understanding.
Madam President, I have some more, but having asked three, I'll pass to later.
All right, thank you. Mr. Greenspan?
Thank you, Madam President.
And it is three, Mr. Greenspan.
I have one question with
Oh, no.
12 parts. But no, I will try to stick to that. My questions pertain to cost to occupancy, not cost of occupancy. I believe it was Mr. Miller raised the question. I understand that in this proposal, which is the only proposal for us, which is what we're to make a decision on, that the TI allowance is $50 a square foot. What are the estimates based on the preliminary space planning to have the building in a position for us to move into? Walls, HVAC, I'm assuming electrical, telephone equipment, wired IT infrastructure. What's our true cost of to get the building in a move-in position?
Your costs will be limited to the interior work after the delivery condition that's provided by Geist Companies. And the estimate that we're working with at this time, which is a pretty good comprehensive estimate, is about $75 per foot from which you would deduct that allowance.
Right. So our cost is would be about $5.5 million.
It's important, yes.
Right.
It's important now to remember that is the estimate that's preliminary that we've been working with.
Sure.
And that the group from URS and PCS have already been kind of gearing up to value engineer those costs and to really look at the finish levels of the materials that would be going into your interiors, value engineering the layout to make sure that it had minimal cost, and using competitive bidding to make sure that you got the best possible price. So certainly you will have input into the design, and the design is at an early stage, but you have an opportunity to control that number. And the assumptions that have been put into the model at this stage, which again are a collaborative, agreed amount of scope, are very conservative on all fronts.
I would add that cost estimating is done at every stage of the process so that we can anticipate what the costs are, and if they begin to climb, that we have an opportunity right away to go back and make adjustments in the design and the materials so that we can manage our budget.
Sure. No, I just want to make sure that that this council understands total financial impact, because it's not just $30 plus per square foot or what have you. That in order for us to get into the building, there will be additional costs on top of these, and whether it's candidly this proposal or any proposal, there's still going to be this cost. So and that's important to know. So another $5.5 million. As far as the IT infrastructure, server rooms, wireless components, HVAC units, security systems, do we have estimates yet broken down as to what these costs will be?
We do not have estimates for the equipment, so we would make a distinction between the TI costs, which is providing the HVAC system, providing the extension for cable, but it does not include computers, it does not include your security equipment, and estimates have not been developed for that.
Right, and we're going through a major computer upgrade now, so those computers, I'm assuming, would transfer over. So that wasn't really, but as far as the additional requirements of server rooms with the dedicated power, with the HVAC, is that included in the TI build-out cost?
If there's additional equipment beyond what you would be moving into the building, then that would be an additional cost. We haven't estimated that. The server rooms themselves would be, part of the TI build-out.
Okay, that's included in there. And an estimate on furniture? We're obviously not taking some of this stuff that,
Correct. We have a very, I would say, conservative estimate on furniture at this point. It comes out to about $45 a square foot, but that does not take into account whatever procurement method that you would use, which would allow us to get more competitive price. We have not discussed that or looked at that, nor does it consider an assessment of any existing furniture that might be refurbished or moved, or for that matter, to look at purchasing refurbished systems instead of new systems. So we have quite a bit of investigation to do on the furniture.
Or raising the existing,
Well, there's
if there's any.
No, I think that it's possible to reuse some of the existing, but I also think that some of it's not in very good condition and might not.
so the estimate for furniture at 45 a square times 220 square feet, 1,000 square, it's about 9.9 million, doing the math on that. So now we're up to 15 million of additional costs. I just want us to understand, and these are costs, no matter where we move, that we would
Correct.
incur these costs, but it's something we've yet to really discuss. And I'll ask, I think I've asked my 3 questions, so I'll come back.
We've heard this before, and you just said it. We will have input on design. I'm sure there's a line. Where's that line?
It's an interesting question because we know that it's important, not only to.
It's important because we've, expressed, I think, that what's shown is not overly pleasing to the eye in that corner, so.
Yeah, at this stage, the renderings that you've seen certainly reflect a very moderate amount of input from the county in general, not very much from the council at all. The goal would be for the executive, the council, the public works team to really all have input. During the process, there are points at which the county gives its feedback and its input into the design during these initial months where URS would be working with you and helping to design this space. Public Works team and Bonnie Teowen would anticipate coming to the council at various points to give updates, to tell you where they were at, to show you the floor plans. I know at this stage, URS actually had met during the fall with your staff to really determine your preliminary needs. And when they would embark upon this, if we had an approval by council and they jumped right in to revise the plans, they would anticipate the very first step being another meeting with your team, as well as all the departments, to make sure they fully understood the needs, a revision of the FIT plans, and then continual updates to you of the design to get your feedback and really your direction and say, what do you think? Here's what our budgets allow us to do. What would you prefer?
So it's kind of a long way of saying the line's fuzzy.
It is. We imagine that you will certainly want to have your input, and we want you to have it.
It really doesn't tell me where the line is.
Help me.
And I know it's hard. You give me what you have, and I say I don't like it. What are we going to do?
Our anticipation is that.
And let's say what I like is maybe 5-10 times more expensive than what you like.
Our anticipation is that you'd be establishing budgets with the cost estimating that URS would be doing along the way, that you would have options presented to you of various things that could fit within that budget, and that you would indicate your preferences, and that if there were certain things that you wanted to see that were outside of that budget, that you would have that discussion at that time. Certainly the goal is to manage it as much as possible and keep those costs under control, but it is at your discretion. The county has the opportunity to decide if you want to do something special on the interior of the building. On the exterior of the building, we have flexibility as well, where the GEIS companies have defined a building condition and they've defined a description of the outside, but with some flexibility. So it doesn't exactly say that this panel of the exterior will be in this location. There's some flexibility, there are some percentages, and there's an opportunity for the county to say, I would prefer X, Y, and Z within the budget. And I understand that if I want to go above that, that's a cost that we have to talk about where it comes from.
The only reason I ask is I think it's important as to what your building looks like, just the face of your county. And many times cities and counties and states kind of miss that, and I would certainly hate to miss this. Mr. Brady.
I'm sorry, just because it's a follow-up on Councilman Gallagher. We've had this discussion and for a long time now. You know, I think it should hopefully go without saying that we want this building to be a special building, and not, oh, well, it's not going to be a special building unless you want to spend another $10 million. So then it would be a special building, because then we're not having a real discussion here about what we're spending. With the whole, you know, part of the big appeal of the build it ourselves is that it's what we want. Not only is it, you know, efficient, useful, you know, affordable, but that it also, you know, is something that that the county and the people of this large metropolitan community can be proud of as a structure, a new structure downtown, and as a seat of their county government. So I just want to, I guess, reemphasize the fact that you know, I sure as heck don't want to say, okay, you can have a very a typical unremarkable building for this much money, and then it's going to be on our backs if we decide it's not good enough, and we have to spend, and we want to spend more money, so the building is attractive enough architecturally that we think it's a respectable place for the county government to have a new seat for the next, certainly for the rest of our lifetimes. And so I just want to make sure we're not, there's no, I don't mean on your part, I've been very impressed with the work that you've done, but there's no shell game here in terms of, you know, us not understanding the true cost of what this structure would be up front.
Your comments are appreciated. We have a number of steps in the process where we can talk about design review and continue to talk about details and materials throughout. And so knowing that that this is very important to you, I think will help us resolve that.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you. I just had a question on our lease payments. With our current agreement, our lease payments are covering the cost of building the facility as well as our cost of occupying the facility. And I'm wondering, are there additional costs? Are any of our payments being used to finance other portions of the complex?
The short answer to that is no, but there are costs in addition to the defined rent that's been outlined. As you know, we've often looked at this, although they do get lumped together at certain times, we've often looked at this as a two-part rent. The first is used specifically to service the debt on the property and to establish a capital reserve that can be grown over time to make sure that the building is maintained in good shape. The second part of the rent is to cover expenses of actually operating and occupying the building in a first-class manner. And so the total rent does include not only building the property, getting the $50 per square foot allowance for the interiors, but also the costs of operating and occupying the facility. In addition to those two rent components, the county would be responsible for its own utilities. The county would be responsible for a specific piece of insurance, not the total insurance, but a specific piece of insurance, fairly nominal. And the county would also be responsible, and pardon me, I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything in our line items. The county would also be responsible for refurbishment costs over time. So if, as the property went on, you wanted to repaint, recarpet, there was a section of the council offices that needed reconfiguring for whatever reason, those would be some ongoing costs that the county could potentially incur.
Mr. Schrein, on round two?
Yeah, round two. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. This, I guess, familiar a little bit with Geis and a lot of the construction techniques. They use a design-build process, is my assumption that this will be following. And at some point, the design function will involve the owner, or in this case, the potential owner of it in the design function. Could you walk through, and perhaps I would also suggest that for my colleagues, exactly what a design build process is, and at what point we have input on these different step points? Because I can only assume that Geis already has a design team in addition to a architectural team already thought out, where they would present 2, 3, 4 renderings that you would have a chance to answer Mr. Gallagher's questions and Mr. Brady's questions, where you're going to be actually have an opportunity for some kind of input. Can you walk through how that design build process actually goes and where our touch points are?
Sure. As you know, the process has a number of deliverable packages that the county would have a review opportunity on each and every one. But the first is an overall design development package, which I think would address a lot of the concerns that you're raising this evening, looking at the overall design of the building, the treatment of the facade, the materials of it, the lobby, how it sits on the street, how it relates to the other buildings, the glazing and the finishing of certain public spaces that are the responsibility of the landlord. And so in that first design package would be prepared very, very quickly, within about 6 weeks of the start period, and we would be involved in the review process at that point.
Would there be renderings at that point from a design team, not an architectural team that draws bricks and mortar, but a design team that draws conceptual, to answer the questions that I think that my colleagues are asking?
I'm assuming that Geis would do that.
Okay, is there?
It's standard practice, but we don't have the details of how they plan.
Okay, do they have somebody that at least, that I think is being discussed, at least on that vein, to make sure cosmetically it looks in keeping with Mr. Gallagher's concern, as is mine, and everybody, and Mr. Brady's?
Yeah, the Geis team did engage during the process of Ocon Design to help them with some of the aesthetic aspects of the building. And the extent of that engagement, I'm not 100% as to how involved they'll be, because the Geis team has a great team on its own as well. But they recognize that Vocon really could bring something a little extra to the table, and ask them to help them with that aesthetic exterior work. So we anticipate that they might be at the table as well.
And historically, we just see a couple of renderings at that point in time, as opposed to just, this is it, take it or leave it? You'd historically see some renderings at that point, I assume, of optional.
But that's typical part of a design development package, is to look at options for facade treatment and provide sketches and renderings.
Even at this stage, the renderings that have been provided, albeit certainly still needing more county input, show options for the exterior that were just concepts and ideas that the Geis team had come up with Vocon. So certainly, showing some options and really thinking about ways to service what you want out of the building is what they're intending to do.
Because, as Mr. Brady says, this is going to be our showpiece, but I think just as equally, it will be whoever the successful bidders showpiece for their presence as far as what they can do. And so my assumption is they have just as much, as the old phrase goes, skin in the game as we do, to make sure they get the design function right for our needs too. And one question in regards to the rotunda. If the option is not retained for us, what level of input will we have as far as actually any control or use of the public activities? Because I keep hearing it's going to be used for the public. What involvement will we have in regards to setting the tone for that public use?
Certainly, the agreement calls for certain uses not to be allowed in the rotunda. I don't think that's exactly what you're getting at, but there will be some uses that, if considered incompatible or unsavory for the county in a first-class use, those would not be permitted, and that's not a problem with the Geis Companies Group. As far as control over the use of that facility, if the county is not actively leasing it themselves, The contract doesn't provide for any outright control by the county for that facility. And, the Geist Group has been very, very active and forthcoming in wanting to approach us and say, what would you like to see there? How can we work together? But at the same time, I think what we wanted to do when we set out in this in the summer was allow people who are private developers to bring their ideas to the table and to say, we may have some really important ideas that we'd like to bring here, but we recognize that the private community also has some concepts that work really well and fit with downtown. So we did not intend to completely control the uses there unless you were leasing it.
It wasn't controlled. Do we have any input?
Other than excluded uses, no.
Thank you.
Mr. Greenspan?
Great, thank you. You gave an example of when I asked about furniture and you had a per square footage number for that. What is the special IT infrastructure cost per square foot?
We don't have that information. We haven't developed it.
Okay.
We need to develop that with your IT department. I think one of the things I would like to remind people is that when the RFP was let, there was an intention of including the data center in this building, which is a very expensive part of a facility. And since then, a decision has been made that the data center will go elsewhere. So that we were looking at server rooms and IT closets, throughout the building. It's a different kind of cost and much less.
Okay, and then, believe it or not, I just have one more question. On the power supply and power backup, will the building have power generators and backup systems, and if so?
Yes, we will. There will be generator and power backup as part of the base building that's sufficient for the county's basic needs of operation. It's beyond life safety, but it's to keep some of your basic systems running so the county could operate in those kind of conditions where power might be out.
So it's not, is it a whole building system, or is it just in strategic areas?
My understanding of that term would be it's a strategic requirement. So not every square inch of the building would be operating, but enough of the building would be operated for your continuancy of business.
And obviously those areas have not yet been defined, just the philosophy of the strategic areas. So as the space planning is being laid out floor by floor, then I'm assuming at that point is when the strategic backup power grid will be identified?
That's right, because when if we had a tornado with a lot of damage or situations like that, we're also not encouraging the citizens to come to the county building during those times. So we know that there's certain operations that need to be functional throughout those periods, and others that could be delayed until a different time.
Okay, second part to my one-part question.
Okay.
The cost of relocation, what can we anticipate? I'm trying to get a total cost of cost to occupancy. So what's the relocation estimate?
We put in a preliminary estimate of $5 per square foot, which is just over $1 million in this instance, and that's a pretty conservative estimate based upon our industry standards for relocation of office space. Typically covers a physical move, your boxes, getting your furniture in, cabling and wiring your furniture, and even to the extent now the county has atypical stationary needs, but often that even covers stationary needs for a group. You will, as part of this process in the coming months, get a consultant to actually identify those costs for you, very specific, but until you talk to your individual departments, you understand how much existing furniture versus new you'd be bringing over, and really identifying some of those questions about the technology that you've touched upon. You can't say for sure what that number will be, but the $5 a foot is a pretty good estimate.
So if we're looking at everything I've been able to identify, as far as the additional cost of TI, an estimate on furniture, cost of relocation, it's about $16.5 million. Plus there's still an IT, and I'm sure I'm missing a couple other components. So rounding, if we were around $20 million, would that be about maybe on the high side, but a number that we should look towards identifying as cost to occupy?
That technology piece is a little bit more ethereal for us. Certainly, if you're looking at the furniture, the relocation, the construction, those are items that we feel a little bit more comfortable speaking to. And, those will be costs out of pocket. They would be costs out of pocket really in each of your options.
Correct.
Yeah.
And this wasn't specific saying that this move to this location would cost us this much more. It's just, once again, a cost to occupy, a cost of us relocating. Okay, great. Those are all the questions.
Madam President.
Mr. Miller.
To Mr. Jeffers, suppose that we agree on a design that we like and it fits within our budget, but then when it's actually built, there's cost overruns and it comes in more than anticipated. Would we have to absorb the difference in the way of higher rent, or would Geis have to absorb the difference?
For the base building that would be delivered to you, that is the responsibility of the Geis companies. For the interior, over which you have the absolute control and design input, that's on the county. So you certainly have the opportunity, again, you could upgrade certain things and just understand that the budgets as they continually get refined and developed will reflect those. But the interiors are what the county is responsible to.
And Madam President, Mr. Jeffers, since this is not going to be our building, at least not for 26 years, I'm wondering whether we would have any direct involvement in the contracting process itself, or would this be entirely up to Geis to deliver?
Are you talking about the initial construction?
Yes, I'm talking about the process of putting out construction contracts and getting bids and choosing contractors and that kind of thing.
That's really going to be the Geis companies running that process, and the county is able to have input as it does in the design during that process, but that really will be the Geis companies, certainly because they're on the hook for that initial development cost. They want to be able to manage that process.
And is it expected that they would primarily do the construction themselves, or would they be using other contractors?
I assume that they would use other contractors. We do know that the minimum requirement is prevailing wage, and the intention is that the Geis companies plans to use union labor on the project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Germain.
Madam Chair, I can't remember exactly some of the concepts that the Geis construction proposal to us in these chambers about the new building, but I know I was intrigued because they were going to be using the latest and sustainable cutting edge, and I can understand the concern of my colleagues on the design, but like I've said before, I think this government of Cuyahoga County is setting the example of how government should be run, and I think our building should be the example of what buildings should be in the future. Practical, sustainable. We want something that's going to be comfortable for the workers, pleasing and easy to the residents that have got to come and use our facility. So those things, I think, are as important as the bling. So I don't know who's got the concept out there of what government building should be of the future, but from what I heard when Geis approached us on their plan, I think their thought process is, we're thinking about building a building for you that's up to date in the future and things that we should be thinking about. So that's just my perspective. So I don't really have a question. I think that's important to say because my colleagues have heard me say this over and over again. We're setting the example of how government should be run. We should set the example of how buildings should be built for government that is economical, practical, and at the same time, something that we all can be proud of.
Mr. Brady?
We just don't want something that looks like it comes from an Eastern Bloc country, okay?
Okay.
Madam President, has there been a foot traffic study? Was that part of what you researched for us and I just missed it, or who's going to be coming through? How many feet are going to be coming through this building daily? Because the present administration building, doesn't get the foot traffic that everybody thinks we're the Justice Center. So there's a real disconnect there. But we're bringing other offices into this, and it would be helpful, I think, to know how many are coming through. Because I think that goes a long way to settling parking issues, indeed, if there are, and I don't anticipate there will be.
We've not done an extensive foot traffic study, but in our preliminary interviews with many of the groups, we asked what kind of visitors they had, how they arrived, what they did when they got to the county building. We have for example, we have a sense of the volume at the Board of Revisions. We have some information about the kind of people that come to the counter, when they come, what the peak periods are. We have an opportunity as we go into the next design phase to collect more information about that. And we can do that.
Thanks.
And I believe also, you've done a study, I think Bonnie's worked on, about which floors and which departments as to the flow of the traffic?
We definitely want to refine that. We had, when we did the FIT plans, we looked at different locations of departments. And one of the advantages of this building is that the public can come in on 2 different floors, which is important because you have a lot of departments that want to interact with the public. So one of the next steps would be to have some detailed conversations, especially with fiscal operations, because most of those departments that interact with the public are in their group, but to get more fully detailed information about where they need to be in the building and how they might co-locate in the future. I know there's some interest in that, within that group, to create sort of a one-stop shop. So instead of going to different parts of the counter or different parts of the building, you can get a lot of basic services from one location.
Any other questions, Mr. Schreier?
And just to follow Mr. Gallagher's, I'm sure that your study probably, if your preliminary one, yielded that we're going to be moving to more and more online county services, and so as a result, that'll actually reduce the number of feet coming in the building, because a lot of it's going to be done electronically. And to Mr. Miller's question, and following up on that, there will be specification drawings in which the Public Works Department will have a chance to review those to make sure that the building construction is being done in accordance with those design build drawings. So we will have an opportunity at that moment, even though we're not the official owners, to have input right then and at that moment in time, I assume.
Yes.
And so even though we're not contracting with the exact folks who are pouring the concrete, Ms. Tewan's department will actually be able to sit there and review the concrete, review the pours to make sure they're up to specifications as to the drawings, because we do have obviously an ownership interest potential in this thing at the end. So is that a correct statement? That we will have the opportunity to make sure that the specs, the concrete, everything that's going in, your department will be in a position not to actually do the construction, but to make sure that it's being built in accordance with those design drawings. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I think there's a couple of different ways that we can address that, whether it's the base building or the interior of the building, whether we do it with our own internal public works staff, whether we utilize the services of URS, or whether we hire another consultant to review those aspects. I think we have some opportunities there. But I think we're definitely on the same page that we want to be involved in that process.
Traditionally, at this point in a design build, the owner would have the owner's rep at the site at every single day to make sure that it's being built in accordance with that. Is that?
Well, it depends how the contract is written, whether it's an IQF or that type of project, but there is some quality assurance oversight, whether it's taken on by the builder or whether it's taken on by the owner. That's usually the case. So I think we have some opportunities. I personally would like to use our own internal staff from Public Works. We have a new hire that's starting in February that's very familiar with vertical construction. And I think it'll give her an opportunity to become familiar with the county process and the new building and really stay engaged in it.
Okay, thank you. Because I think that Mr. Miller was concerned to make sure that it's being built to our specs as much as their specs, and we will have at least have a chance to at least have some input and watch what's going on. To the parking question, with the garage coming out of the current Ameritrust garage, these are a bunch of mechanical questions. What will be the right, regardless of who is maintaining the rotunda, for people to pass through from the garage through our building on their way to the rotunda? What rights, if any?
Well, the county will have the exclusive right to use that bridge that connects the garage to your building. And you also have, as you've heard, easement rights to cross from the new building into the tower. That connector would be on the third floor of both the tower and the new building. They would line up. And then you would have an additional easement to get from the tower into the rotunda. It's important, though, to remember that those easements come into effect in the event you are actively leasing those spaces. You have options to lease the third floor of the tower, which is about 10,000 feet, and you have the option to lease the rotunda. Those easements don't necessarily allow you the ability to cross into somebody else's space if you've said, we don't need that space, but I don't think that's what you're asking.
No, it was, if the public is parking in that building and they
Right.
want to go to either one of those next contiguous buildings, the hotel apartment building or the rotunda, do they have any rights to pass through our building?
Madam President,
If you allow them.
if I may, just as the documents are currently drafted, the walkway between the building that would be our building and the Ameritrust garage is, we have an exclusive right to use that. The county has control over who goes over, who doesn't go over. So they do not have an automatic right. Now, obviously, we could later be approached by the developer, by somebody who wants to have those rights, which will open the door for discussions in terms of how we do that. But the current formulation is that that walkway is for the county's exclusive use.
That's the bridge over the road. I'm talking about once you've gotten successfully over the bridge to go through our building, what rights, if any, does anybody have to pass from that piece in our county building to either of the next two buildings, having parked in the garage?
That would be your
Not
prerogative.
unless we take over any of those spaces. They do not have the right.
No. What is the public's right?
There's no rights given to anyone else to pass through your building.
It's your prerogative to allow people, and you'd have to make sure that your floor plan, certainly, the way that it's set up now with that secured entrance on the fourth floor from the garage, you'd have to make sure that your floor plan allowed for that as well.
So somebody staying in the hotel that was discussed would not be able to move from that parking garage into the hotel without going down to ground level, going across. And I'm just trying to identify how the functional piece of our building is going to get used.
Right.
And the same thing with the apartment dwellers, the way it's currently.
Yes, and I don't know that they've defined exactly how much of the building would be apartment or other use, but yeah, same thing.
If there was one apartment in an all hotel or one hotel and one apartment, the whole thing's apartment and one hotel room, it's the same issue, it seems to me. How do they get there if they're parking that? Because I assume they're, like any big city hotel, they're going to want to have parking someplace. Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Madam President. It's my understanding that once we move into the new building, that the employees, the custodians and trades will be GEIS employees. What will happen to our current employees that are trades and custodians?
This might actually be a great question for Ms. Teeuwen, but our understanding is that they would either be Geis employees or third-party contracted companies who would be providing those services that Geis would manage, and that your staff would actually be deployed to other facilities.
See? That's the correct answer.
That you have other facilities where that staff could certainly be used and needed, and that they would go there instead.
And are these people employed, they're going to be union workers?
I do not know that that's the case for the maintenance staff.
The requirement under the contract is that they would be compensated and have benefits comparable to what public employers pay comparable employees in Cleveland. So it's using what we would pay our own employees or what the city of Cleveland does with their own employees. That's how they would be that's how they would be compensated.
But what will happen, I mean, will you be laying off some of these maintenance workers or what? Ooh.
No, we don't anticipate any layoffs occurring because of the Geis building. Keep in mind, the majority of the people that we are moving into this facility are already at leased spaces, which we do not have custodians or tradespeople. So we're looking at the people that are in the administration building. What other buildings do we occupy?
Coming out of Courthouse Square.
Some people out of Courthouse Square, but we don't anticipate any layoffs at all for the trades or the custodians due to this.
Will they have the same benefits as the employees?
The employees at the new headquarters project?
Yes.
Well, their pay scale is to be comparable, and so that's the requirement of the agreement that we have.
Well, I mean, I think I'm just picking up on the tail end of this, but obviously, as a public body in Cuyahoga County, we're going to be, very determined that anyone who works for us is treated in a way that would be acceptable in this part of the country.
Understood, and that absolutely is the intention.
And if I may clarify, that was actually a provision in the contract to make sure that we don't use the private sector pays a lot less for, even if you're unionized in the private sector, you don't make as much or you don't have the same benefits as in the public sector. So we made it a mandatory requirement in the contract that it's be comparable to what how we treat our own employees or how the city of Cleveland treats its own employees, that it's comparable to other public employees who perform the same functions. So it's above and beyond just being unionized. It's that they have to be also treated similar to how public employees are treated in this area.
Okay, anything further? At this point, if there are no further questions, we have our next council meeting on January the 22nd, a week from today. Is there a motion to move this item to the for a third reading on the 22nd? Move it to the council, regular council agenda for third reading. Moved by Ms. Conwell.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Jimana. Any other, all those in favor indicate by, yes.
For comment on the motion that's been moved and seconded, I will support moving it for a third reading, but that does not, I don't want anybody to assume that just because it's coming out for a third reading, that I will support a vote on the 22nd. So I do want to put that on the record, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to make it, that we're going to, yeah, it's okay. But we're going to move it for third reading on the 22nd. So in case we decide, if there's something comes up and we've changed our mind, we are not required to vote on the 22nd. But if we don't move it to put it on the agenda to the whole body for the 22nd, then we can't vote at that time.
Right, because Mr. Jeffries made some promises to get back to us on a number of items that a lot of folks asked, and I think that's only fair that he should have an opportunity to do that. But if he doesn't, I also think it's appropriate for us to wait to gather that, to make sure we get the information.
As indicated before, we do have the time on the tax credits until the end of February, so if we need the additional time, we do have the additional time. All right, all those in favor of moving to the regular agenda indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Anything other, any miscellaneous business? Any other public comment? Anyone signed in for public comment?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, if nothing else before this body, is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. Okay, we stand adjourned. Thank you.